to all the moms. Moms of children who are still at home or all grown up. Moms who've outlived a son or daughter. Or moms of babies they never got to hold. Moms who've raised kids all on their own, or became a mom to someone who needed one. Moms of children who have wandered from God, or the longing to be moms who are still waiting. God perfectly arranged each of you into the role you have today. His word recognizes you as capable, strong, and praiseworthy. Everything you do makes our lives more beautiful. Happy Mother's Day.
Well, happy Mother's Day weekend to all of you phenomenal special ladies that we have with us today. So let's give our moms and those special ladies a round of applause in our life. I know that today and this weekend can be a great time to celebrate. And I know that some of you are also this weekend, it might be your first Mother's Day weekend without that special lady in your life. And so this weekend can have so many feelings, and I am right there with you, to the point of celebrating, to the point of I still have voicemails saved on my phone from my mom that I'll go and hit and listen to her sweet voice talk to me. And so no matter where you are, I hope that you are sensing God's peace and presence with you in a very special way. This week we're going to be tackling encourage authenticity. And there's really no greater weekend to kind of encapsulate that than to whatever season of life you're in is to be authentic to where you are. But we encourage you to take a moment with that special lady and to go to the photo booth that we have for you and take those special pictures. Guys, don't grumble, right? Make sure you take care of those special ladies this weekend, but we encourage you to do that. Hey, if you are visiting with us today, I just wanted to take a moment to introduce myself. My name's Harold. I serve as the lead pastor here, and I'm so grateful that you've chosen and given us a chance to worship with us this weekend. If you were here last week, I wasn't here. Thank you for allowing me to take a weekend and to be a husband and a supporter to Whitney. I'm officially married to a master's degree graduate. Yeah. So I'm super proud of her, and she's going to be really mad at me as I do this all weekend, but she'll have to get over it. But thank you for allowing me to be away on a Saturday so I could just be completely present with her. I greatly appreciate that. But then also last weekend on Sunday, I was able to go to our Peru campus, and what a blessing. Guys, we are so blessed to have Pastor Trevor and Pastor Sam, and now Tanner is going to be leading worship in Peru, and they are absolutely crushing it in Peru. They're doing a great job. They love the people there, and so we need to give our Peru family a round of applause for what they're doing and the days ahead of what they're going to be continuing to do. So we're going to be tackling again. We're right in the middle, a little bit past the middle way of the series at our core values, right? We're talking about our DNA, our structure as a church, as a body of believers. And today we're going to be navigating encourage authenticity. And so as I was working through this series and working on messages, and I may have lied to you. I said week 1 may have been the hardest, which was love unconditionally. This one might be harder. But we're going to get to that in a moment. But to be honest, I'm just trying to give you a good hook so everybody just leans in a little bit more, okay? But we're going to be approaching this a little bit differently. If you have your Bible, you can turn to the book of Genesis chapter 1. We're going to be in one verse 27. If you don't have your Bible with you, do not panic. It'll be up on the screen. But in Genesis chapter 1, verse 27, it says this. It says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." Now, we're going to be approaching this a little bit differently because usually if you're visiting with us today, usually I'll come up and I'll share a funny story, right, to kind of ease the tension in the room. I'll share a funny story to kind of give everybody a chance to lean in, but we're going to be tackling from a little different perspective. I wanted to start today with a principle, basic truth. And if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. I wanted to start with a basic principle truth. Here it is. You are made in the image of God. Okay? And I want you to receive that today. I want you to write that down. If you need to, go get it tattooed somewhere on your body. It's really important that you understand this. You are made in the image of God. So what does that mean? Does that mean that when you get to heaven, is God going to look like Pastor Harold? I hope not. That would be really disappointing, right? So no, that's not what it means. What it means is that we are created in his image in the sense of his likeness. Because mankind alone has natural continence looking upward. As in, we are the species on the planet that we are aware of something greater and bigger than ourselves. Mankind alone has such a variety of facial expressions, right? So if you go to the zoo and you look at the gorilla, you know, he's not going to be smiling and frowning and doing stuff. Like wives, he may scratch himself like your husband does, but that's about it, right? And so we have this ability to express ourselves in beautiful ways. Mankind alone speaks. Mankind alone, this is really important. If you're taking notes, write this down. Mankind alone possesses personality, morality, and most important, spirituality. You are authentic. Right? I mean, God made you in a very special, unique way. You are the only one that has your thumbprint. Everybody hold your thumb up. That's it. One of a kind. Your thumb body. Okay, I'm sorry. That was my dad joke for the day. I thought that one was going to crush, but it did not. All right. But encourage authenticity. That's what we're going to be navigating today. And so each week we've kind of taken a moment and to define it. And so encourage authenticity means this. It means you're true to your own personality, values, and spirit, regardless of the pressures that you're under to act otherwise. And I feel like that's a pretty solid definition of encourage authenticity. If you want to maybe take it a step down and maybe simplify it just a little bit more, a way to understand this value, it is to come as you are. It is to, and also to come as you are and to encourage others to do the same. Now, before you get ahead of me, I want you to know that Crossbridge, if you're visiting, whether you've been here for 6 minutes or 60 years, Crossbridge is a safe place. It's a welcoming place. It is a place for you no matter where you're at on your journey in your relationship with Jesus, no matter what. Unless you use ketchup on your steak, then you need more help than we can give you, all right? All right, but seriously, we want you to come authentically. Like we want you to be who you are. You know, a long time ago when churches started to thankfully adopt this and do this, what this basically meant was if you want to wear shorts, wear shorts. If you want to be in boots, wear boots. If you want to wear jeans and a t-shirt, wear jeans and a t-shirt. And that's part of it. That's totally part of it. That we don't want you to put on a facade to feel like you're welcome here or you're comfortable here, whatever the case may be. We want you to come as you are. But I believe that means more than just what we wear on our bodies. But I do believe that over time, that God will begin to do a work in me. That God's going to begin to do a work in you and in us. And so what that work that he's doing over time, those things that he's challenging you to step into, to give up, to give away, whatever the case may be, that's also authentic. Because over time, God needs to get a hold of us. He needs to get a hold of me. And I truly believe that God is going to get a hold of you. And so the task, right? The task is, how do we be authentic to that? right? How do we be authentic to what God is wanting to do in us? Well, Pastor Harold, this is easy for you. This has got to be, out of all the things that you do, this has to be the easiest because, Harold, this is what you do for a living. I mean, you should be able to knock this out of the park. I'm sure it's easy for you to be authentic. It's not. It's not. You know, I don't know if you've ever heard a pastor talk about this, but I don't dread too many questions that come my way. But there is one. When somebody doesn't know me, the dreaded question is, what do you do for a living? Right? And it's not because I'm not proud of what I do. I adore what I do. I feel so honored and humbled to be your pastor. But I'm not talking about you guys. What I'm talking about is if I'm standing in line at Disney, right, and you're standing there for an hour waiting to get on this ride, right? I mean, you got to pass the time somehow, and so people talk. What's one thing that you talk about? You're not going to bring up, hey, how's your marriage? No, I mean, you're going to make small talk. Well, what do you do for a living? Where are you from? That kind of stuff. But it always gets brought up. It always gets brought up. And so I'll be standing there and it'll get brought up, and it gets brought up because it's such a part of our identity and what makes us who we are and all the things. And it'll get brought up and usually I won't lie, but I'll wiggle, right? And they'll be like, what do you do for a living? I was like, well, I'm in sales, right? You know, because usually that's kind of a blanket statement, and most people won't pry, right? Unless you Whitney, she digs, right? I mean, she'll have somebody crying by the time we got on an amusement park ride. I mean, it's crazy. But you know, I just I try to be chill, and I'm like, I'm in sales, and usually if they ask, that's when it gets tricky. And then if they say, well, what kind of sales are you in? I'm like, well, your life. Yeah, I'll sell you life. Right? I'll sell you the truth of what Jesus Christ can do in your life, but it's hard. It's hard to always be authentic. It's hard. It's hard to, when you're taking these steps in your relationship with Jesus and what he's challenging you to do and some of the crazy things that he might ask you to do, it's hard to be authentic to that all the time. But the reason why it's hard for me to be authentic in those moments is I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable. All right, I don't want to make people feel uncomfortable, because if I'm standing there in line and I say, hey, I'm a pastor, like sometimes that conversation gets shut down real fast, right? And I don't want to do that, and because I don't want people to treat me different. I'm just Harold, right? I'm just Harold. I'm here with my family. We're going to get on this ride. We can talk about, right, all this stuff. And so I don't want people to look at me or treat me different. And to be honest, in those moments, I want to be liked. Like, I want to be accepted. Like, I want to be able to talk about football, and I want to be able to talk about all this other stuff, and I want to be liked and accepted. I don't know if anybody is resonating with this today, right? When it comes to being authentic. So what keeps you from being authentic? And so throughout this series, one of the cool things that has kind of organically happened is that we could all agree that the core values that we believe that are part of our DNA, part of our culture, that they're really good things. That they're not just really good things, but they're like biblical principles, spiritual principles that we believe Jesus Christ is wanting to work in us in such a way that we can truly live into those. But one of the cool things that we've been navigating in this series is that when there's an opportunity and a chance to grow into a core value, there's also the temptation to not to. Right? There's also the temptation to not to. And this one is no different. As we're making our strides in our relationship with Jesus, the tension will be there. It will be in us. And the cool thing that we've learned is through this whole series, the temptation essentially in the most simplistic form, it is to fall back on our normal. Well, what was our life prior? What were we doing prior? What are the muscle memories of who I am, of what I think my identity is? Because sometimes we lose sight of what we talked about as a basic biblical principle truth, is that you are made in the image of God. But somehow along the way, as we grow and mature and get our own thoughts and feelings and emotions and all these things, we lose sight of that. So what keeps you from being authentic? And as I was working on this message and praying through this message, one word kept sticking out to me, And if you're writing down notes, I encourage you to write this down. It was the word value. Value can be difficult when it comes to encouraging and being encouraged by our own authenticity. Because we believe the lie, friends. We believe the lie of the enemy that we are not enough, that you're not enough. And if you don't believe me, how often have you spent time pondering if you measure up to things around you? How often do you ponder if you are doing enough to get in life where you need to be? How much of that encompasses your life? And worse off, right? And worse off, we believe and measure our value simply because we believe that the world sets the market. They set the bar. So often, we believe that the world sets the standard, right? There's a lot of tension in the room right now. That's okay. But seriously, that's what we do. We look at social media, we look at on the news, we look at the stock markets, we look at all this different stuff, and we allow the world to set the standard of what our value is. And then the enemy just picks and claws and chews away at it over time, and over time. But I want to encourage you again, you are made in the image of God. You are made in his image. So maybe you've never heard this, but I want to encourage you today that you are value. You have value. You have so much value. And I know that it's easier said than done. Why? Because are you completed? No, I'm not either. I have gaps and things in my life that I have to work on, but you know what? We're still of value. We don't have everything figured out. Will we ever struggle again down the road with the concept of what value is in our life? You probably will. You probably will. Because you're human and I'm human, and it's things that we all have to tackle together. But when we truly understand that our value comes from him, it helps point our compass. Because the enemy is going to try to throw things at you to derail what God is wanting to do. And God is looking at you right now saying, keep your focus on me. Your value, your worth comes from me. And you're going to be tempted to look at other things and get it from other things. But I'm telling you, if you just stay focused on me, you are going to understand your value. I was preaching one time in Costa Rica on a missions trip. I got asked to speak in front of a few hundred students and a bunch of youth pastors and stuff. And obviously I was in student ministry at that point in my life. And anytime a youth pastor is traveling, it is like you cannot go through a message and not bring up your spouse, right? I can barely do it now. But I remember being down there, but as a youth pastor, you always got to describe your spouse in a very particular way, usually smoking hot, really good looking, all that kind of stuff, right? And so typical youth pastor stuff. And so I remember I start my message and I'm introducing her. We didn't have kids yet. And I'm like, hey, by the way, if you guys will, like to meet Whitney, she's the smoking hot chick in the back, right? All this stuff. And the message went fine. It was an awesome time together. And so I was kind of wrapping up. I was getting my belongings and I was kind of walking off the platform. And this pastor is like on me. He's on me. He's just like marching as fast as he can. And he's stomping and he's grunting. His face is beet blood red. And he's like, how dare you? How dare you say that? Like, how dare you talk about your wife in such a way? Because now every woman, every girl in this room is comparing themselves to your wife. How dare you? How dare you? And I said, sir, I don't know you. And you don't know me. But let me tell you something. You have no earthly reason, no earthly idea why I think Whitney is smoking hot. Now, you might have an idea, but why don't you ask me first? The things that I find attractive about my wife is that she loves the Lord with everything she's got. She pursues him daily. She loves those deeply around her, and she wants to help people. That's my sexy. Why don't you change your definition of smoking hot? Let those girls compare themselves to Whitney. I think that's an honor. He didn't say much after that. But we let the world dictate what value is. We let the world completely cultivate what value is and what the standard is and all of this stuff. And I think it's time that God's people starts taking back what belongs to us. I mean, don't you guys agree? I mean, don't you think the enemy has had enough rope for too long? And I was so thankful that I had the opportunity to speak to that guy. And I wasn't trying to be rude, but I was just like, dude, you don't know what I think is sexy. You don't know what I think is smoking hot. And he had this epiphany. And I was so proud, right, to stand up for myself, because you don't get to determine my value and what that means to me. And it's interesting that now that I have a daughter, I'm way more careful with my words. But now that I have a daughter, I'm trying to teach her that word already, value. Why? Because I know the world's not. Every night I hold that little girl and we dance every night. And I pray over her, and every night when I lay her down, I pray over her, God, would she just know you in a radical, special way? Will she always know her value? Will she please always know who she is and whose she is? That she would be able to dictate the value and not let the world do that for her. We're going to be in the book of Mark, chapter 12, verse 13. You can flip over there if you have your Bible with you. It'll be up on the screen as well. In Mark 12, it says this in verse 13. It says, later they sent some of the Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. They came to him and said, teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity. You aren't swayed by others because you paid no attention to who they are. But you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay or shouldn't we? But Jesus knew their hypocrisy, and they were trying. He says, why are you trying to trap me? He asked, bring me a denarius and let me look at it. So they brought him the coin, and he asked them, whose image is this and whose inscription? Caesar's, they replied. And then Jesus said to them, give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's. And they were amazed at him. And so now the challenge of encouraging authenticity, it is to live into it. And I know that this passage, it may seem odd to reading at a time like this, so why am I even reading it at all? So some context is that we got some people who are trying to trip up Jesus on his words so they can basically get him into trouble. And so they ask him, they ask him whose inscription or whose image is on the coin. What is it marked by? And so Jesus says, you recognize, and Jesus is telling them that you recognize Caesar's civil authority when you use his coins. Therefore, you are obliged to pay him the taxes that he asked for. So it's pretty self-explanatory. And so what he is essentially saying, he's saying you are missing the point of what is most valuable. What you have in your hand, what is marked, it does have Caesar's head on it. It's got an inscription of him on it. It clanks around when you put it in a bag, but essentially that's what it is. If it's his, give it back to him. But the cool part about this passage is that he says, give to God what is God's. That's what he followed up with it. He followed up the coin belonging to Caesar because Caesar's image was stamped on it. And he's saying you need to give your life to God because God's image is stamped on you. Which is what we learned in Genesis, is that you are made in his image. That you are stamped by him. That he has his inscription on you. And essentially what we have here, we have Jesus being an authenticator. How cool is that? Your value doesn't come from the things that you hold. Your value comes from the fact that God has put his fingerprint on you. And nothing can take that away ever, ever. How many of you have ever seen the show Pawn Stars on the History Channel? Anybody? Any history buffs, right? Or if you're into just pawning things? right? If you don't know what it is, anybody watches Antique Roadshow? That's a good one too, right? An Antique Roadshow is essentially where these people will bring these really important items that was in their family, right? And so there'll be like this little old lady that's like, my grandmother gave me this Picasso. She bought it for 2 blueberries, and now it's worth like $50 million, right? It's one of those shows. Well, Pawn Stars is kind of like that, but it's a little bit more entertaining. And so on Pawn Stars, essentially what happens is it's a pawn store, and somebody will bring in an item. They'll bring in sports memorabilia and a musical instrument, art, gold, jewelry, all kinds of stuff. And so basically the premise, it's like the same thing every time, just a different item. And so they'll bring it in and the person will lay it on the counter. And the first question will be, well, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to pawn it or sell it? 99% of the time, they're like, I want to sell it. And so the guy will pick it up and he'll start looking at it and he goes, well, I'm kind of familiar with this, but if you can hang out a few minutes, I've got an expert in the area, right? I don't know how they're always in the area, but they're always in the area, whether it's a jersey or whatever. And so, but they'll have a jersey or a guitar, and then a guy will walk in and he's the authenticator. Like, he's the guy to be able to tell you if it's real or not. He'll look at the signature. He'll put it under like a magnifying glass, all the stuff, right? But the really cool part about the show is when they have a jersey, like a sports jersey, or they have a guitar, right, that was like a really historical instrument from a band or a musician. What's really cool is when the athlete who wore the jersey can kind of come in and they can actually authenticate their own signature. That's the cool part of the show. It's really cool when it's an instrument and the person in the band is like, oh yeah, like I used that guitar on my 86 tour, right? And his signature's on the back, and you can see his sweat on the guitar because it hasn't been cleaned, and they're authenticating the item, right? They're authenticating the item. And then this discussion comes that once they figure out that everything's real, then they have this really cool discussion of like the worth. Like, well, let's talk about the price. What is the value on this item? And then they kind of go bickering back and forth, right? But I was thinking about this message, and I thought it would be so cool if our church was like that. Not that we would pawn stuff. That would be weird. I don't know how that would work with taxes and the IRS and all that. But it would be kind of cool if, I don't know, I was at my office and you come walking through the door, right? And then I would be there and I would say like, well, what brings you in today? You know, and you're like, well, I've got this thing going on in my life and I don't know what to do and I don't know how to handle it and I don't know who I should talk to. I don't know what I should say to my spouse. I don't know what I should do with my kids. I don't know what I should do with work. I don't know. I've got all these stuff going on and I don't know what to do, right? Because to be quite frankly, most of the time, I feel very inexperienced. When you come to me and you pour your heart out to me, and I'm so glad and honored that you do, and I want to pray with you and I want to journey with you, but in all reality, I mean, that's about the extent of what I can do. But what I would really love to be able to do is 5 minutes to hang out, because I got a guy in the area who knows something exactly about this. And so you hang out in my office and we're chit-chatting, you know, and then God walks in. And then God walks in and he goes, oh yeah, I remember back in 1987 when you were born. It was a beautiful day. I remember I knitted you in your mother's womb. I remember that day. I remember the day that you got your first bike. I remember the day you got married. I remember the day you graduated from college. I remember the day you had your first kid. I remember all this stuff. I remember your greatest moments. But I also remember your greatest failures. I was there with you all the time. I was right there. I was a part of what was going on. And I'm just basically sitting there watching you and God interact. And God is saying, I made you in my image. God is saying that my fingerprint is impressed on you. God is saying, I value you. You are authentic. You may not have it all figured out. You may have a long way to go. You may not be as far down the road as the next person or the person that you're sitting next to right now. You may not be at that point in your life. But what if this kind of interaction would happen and then we talked about price? And then what if you had the courage to ask God, what are we looking at? What am I worth? What can we get from me? And he looks at you dead in the eyes. He goes, this item's priceless. There's no amount of money. There's no amount of money that is worth more than your life. You hold so much value because you're mine. You're my son. You're my daughter. You're my child. You are made in my image. There's nothing more valuable than you. Could you imagine if that was our thought process? Could you imagine of the steps that we could take? Because we are authentically being who we are, and we are encouraging that in ourselves. We are encouraging others to do the same. To know that we are made in His image. To have that kind of value. And if you don't believe me, I can prove it to you. Here in just a moment, we're going to be taking communion. And there's no greater value. There's no greater value that Jesus put on you than what He did for you and I on the cross. There's no greater value that He could put on us. If the ushers can make their way forward, we're going to be passing the elements today. I got a couple of instructions for you. If you have a gluten allergy, we have elements in the back for you. You do not have to be a member of Crossbridge to participate in communion with us. If you have a little one with you, that is between you and them, and we encourage you to make that decision. Also, when you get the cup, you will get 2 cups. The bread will be underneath the first cup where the juice is. We'll be taking that one first. So when you get your cups, make sure you split those apart. And here in just a moment, we're going to stand and we're going to worship and we're going to reflect. And I encourage you to do that. I encourage you to have that interaction with God. I encourage you, I want to speak over you. Why don't you ask God today? God, what do you think of me? God, what am I worth? And I promise you that He is going to be speaking back to you that you are priceless.